Welcome, Matt. How you doing?
Sir, I'm doing great. Thanks for
Okay,
having me.
thanks for coming on the show today.
Sure.
Matt, what I'd really like to do and to start off with is just give us a really 30,000 foot view of who you are.
For sure. Again, thanks for having me. Matt Synakowski. I've been in the sports and media business for about the past 10, 12 years. Data strategy has been, and I'm super happy to be doing the show, but data strategy has been a very big part of what I've done. And as we're going to focus on in this podcast, I've really been an extension or an arm or embedded right within the sales teams to really looking at how we use data to either like structure deals better, how we measure our KPIs and keep, executive reporting and the, like the healthcare, the checkup of everything that our business is doing, pacing and seasonality. To really drive go-to-market strategies and being the most efficient with what we're already doing. And then using external data of what's going on in the landscape of biz dev and competition and, changing landscapes and products and services that you can kind of marry to your internal data. And then how do we use that to optimize everything? So I've worked in that kind of internal consulting role for about the past 10 years. I really love the sexiness of driving sales, driving the big deals, being tied to the bottom line versus kind of the back end stuff, which I'm sure there's a lot of that I rely on, and a lot of your followers are, the coders, the engineers, the data lake structurers, where I want to be a super user of all that, have it at my fingertips, translate it, and help tell the story of driving sales. Yeah. So that's where I've kind of made my hay the past 10 years, both in the live sports venue of actual games going on in arenas at Madison Square Garden and the Boston Bruins, and then transitioning to the media side at Fox Sports of bringing those same events to you on your TV or now your phone or wherever it may be. So kind of got that 360 view of the sports and entertainment world and all the different ways you can kind of take it in and all the ways you can monetize it. So I know we'll get into stuff with like analytics with the marketing folks. I haven't like lived in that world of targeting and demographics, but again, it's always how do you leverage those insights provided to you from a consumer's insight group to make sense of it, put it into a story, arm the sales team with weapons when they go out to make these deals to the market, and then make the most of it. So there's kind of the 30,000 foot view.
Great.
And again, thanks for having me. It's super inspiring, man. The first podcast.
I am.
Well, look, this is super inspiring because me and my sister have been talking about, she's in physical therapy, doing our own podcast, short form videos on, just like taking care. I have a former health and wellness background of, there's 30 million podcasts out there. So it's like everyone's doing it. There's not a reason not to do it. People have willing followers. It doesn't have to be the Joe Rogan podcast, which is super popular over here in the States. But a marketing arm and driving awareness, like this is awesome, man. So I'm glad that you thought of me to be the first guest here.
Thank you for accepting, and I'm delighted to have you on. It's been wonderful. But listen, you picked up on so many things across that piece, across your lifetime of being in the sports and media industry. And I think you talk about sales and specifically arming them with weapons. But let me ask you first, and analytics aside and data, but what are the things that have challenged you in that process of getting into the mind of a sales team and understanding what data weapons they need? What is it that drives them? And from my experience, and I ask that question because I've often come up against teams that are quite skeptical around data. For me, what challenges have you had, and how have you overcome that? What strategies have you put in place to help them drive the understanding, the take on onboarding of data, and then the usage of that to drive that growth, as you talked about earlier?
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is, it's like, again, you have all this data in your organization. And I'm assuming at this point in 2020, you have some level of data. Maybe you're not organizing it well. Maybe it's in several different places. Maybe the data's in spreadsheets, PowerPoints. Like it could be that manual. I don't know. But there's insights and trends that when I sit down with the salesperson, the first thing I do is I flip it onto them. I become the salesperson. I become a needs analysis guy. Like, what are your challenges? I understand that certain words have to come out of your mouth, and the client has to hear those to get a deal across the table.
Yeah.
And really, the only thing you're pushing is product, price, and the structure of a deal and the terms. So what assets get those deals over the line? And then what data points are we looking at internally, those KPIs I kind of mentioned that we're always reporting against? So you're measured against a set of KPIs. There's an underlying set of KPIs under that. So if we're looking at the average price we need to hit to achieve our sales and financial goals, well, there's a way to get there where if you're in a market B2B where you're negotiating deals, somewhere you get over and under that average threshold. How do you how are you structuring deals? How are you prioritizing the prospects that you're looking at, your client base? Like, where are you tracking all that? And so when I sit down with the sales leaders, I'll start with the leader, but then I go right to the front lines and saying, well, where are you pulling that? Like, how are you deciding what client to go to when? And hopefully, again, you have all your systems. Sometimes it's just the pen and the paper, man. Like, I'm just taking notes of all right, and I'm catching trends on how that rep goes to the market, how they're looking, and hopefully you catch a little bit of similarity of all right, you know what? Sometimes they just need the list of their prospects and the historical spend that they've had with us as a company, and see where the dips in our portfolio, where the growth in our portfolio has been. And if you can pull that across different sales teams, where I've worked with national sales teams in 4 different cities, there's going to be a standardized process you can get of giving that information to them so they can look at their own business, because that's what they are. They're the CEO of their own business. How can I prioritize everyone I do business with, and then work with me? I'll find out little inconsistencies between what you consider a good client or a bad client, or somebody that spends a lot or doesn't. There still might be little inefficiencies of, maybe they are one of our best spenders, but they don't participate in this part of our portfolio, which is one of our newer products. And why have you pitched that to them? And you start asking that question to get open dialogue, but you bring it to life and it's not complicated analytics. It's just like simple reporting sometimes, where you're putting that stuff in a scalable fashion, one in front of the front lines, and then rolling that up to the executives to say, all right, here's the scale of all of our customers, and do I see common inefficiencies in where our clients are spending on our portfolio, and does that reflect on our sales team of how they're going to the market, or does that reflect on the actual supply and demand of what we're offering to the market? So I kind of start there with that needs analysis and just really simplifying the business into those key metrics. And again, it can be average price, it can be volume of spend, it can be how long they've been a client with us. But to scale it across the different sales departments, again, if you have a bigger organization like Fox Sports selling nationally, that becomes a very simple way to get people just buying into kind of things they already know, but putting it right at their fingertips. So I found that to be like a good first step of just kind of providing them with quick tools of, here's your business and here's how the company looks at it. And then so we can start structuring our deals to meet our internal demands of hitting sales goals and forecasts. But also take into account externally everything you told me, the challenges of targeting certain clients or certain categories. So I think that's always been a good starting point. It's not hard. Gathering all that information can be, right? Even though it's simple information. So you just got to, then our end, I'd work with guys like you or back-end engineers of, where does that information live? Is it easy to pull? But that's where I start with the sales team, just really trying to be an ally to them.
So you're absolutely starting from that strategic perspective at the beginning, and then you're drilling 100%. Down to. So how do you translate the person at the top? And you talk about KPIs and KPIs under KPIs. So I'm always worried that we overload KPIs onto sales teams or any other kind of team, and then we get into a position where suddenly we're all floating under this mire of KPIs, and nobody can really see what's
paralysis
happening
by
above
analysis,
that. Yeah,
right?
exactly.
Yeah.
So how do you get that fine balance from speaking to the senior exec to then cascading that down to those, the guys who are in the field, going out, making sure they can do those sales, understanding the client, understanding what you've done with them before, and you talked about, they only buy this product, but how do we get them to buy this product? How do you start to mold that when maybe you're using your internal data, but there's a whole ecosystem of other data points or triggers that might be external to the organization? How do you build that in? Because I can see you're starting with low-hanging fruit, and that's the way to start. Absolutely. Because you want that insight and that value piece to be delivered to those guys. But from then, sometimes people say, well, so what? I've got this data. What do I do with it? So how do you get that drive and that sustainability in what you're doing?
Yeah, that's funny because I've had this talk with our sales, and you have it over and over again with them where, my piece with the data, I've never been the innovator. It's just like, hey, let's tweak what we're already doing. We're just missing we're missing 5% more revenue than we could get here just by tweaking what we're already doing. Nothing has to change besides you have to offer something else to the client at the table, and then we negotiate off that. But for instance, I'll give a specific example, and I hope not to go too deep in the weeds, but
that's fine.
But for the NFL, which is with the crown jewel product that I worked at with Fox Sports, in-game inventory, the commercials that you air within game are very finite, but they fluctuate from game to game. And obviously, if you have big brand markets like the Dallas Cowboys and the Green Bay Packers, those games are going to attract more viewers. Therefore, more brands want to be in them. Sure. So we have you have your slate of games over the year. They sell out at a high percentage, but they don't 100% sell out. So the last few commercials and even a high demand game, they're very expensive. The content business is becoming very fragmented and digitized, and people can spend their money really efficiently. So selling out those last few units in an NFL game can be challenging. So what you see here is, all right, we have an average price we have to hit overall for these games, and we have a sell-through percentage of X. Nothing more than almost a simple yield analysis that I did granularly by spot. So if we're airing up to 70, 75 commercials in a game, you know what? I determined we always sell at the first 40.
Right.
Always.
Okay.
We always. Yeah. Okay. So then the 41st unit through to the 50th unit, we sell those out about 80% of the time. So pretty good. Yeah. Once we start getting to the last few, you see sometimes even for high demand games, we're only going to sell them out 5-10% of the time. Okay. So so now we know that. Know that. Yeah. So now most of these commercials, everything's changing in the pandemic, by the way. Usually everything for the NFL season is being bought right now. Right. In the upfronts, the media upfronts, the scatter market, which is week by week, where advertisers have leftover dollars and maybe they want to target a few specific games depending on the matchups. That all happens in the fall. So you're choosing that as 20% of those last few units. Okay. So but we see that in those last few units, they're not selling out, right? And so we're throwing those and we're making them good to other advertisers, kind of giving them added value in those games. Well, if I know that we're only selling it out 10% of the time, well, why not during the upfront? It's just all I'm doing right now is a big elaborate buy one, get one free almost. It's like, hey, for committing to something at X% year over year increase of what we've been doing business at pricing, I'm not going to throw this into your deal. I'll supplement it with giving you'll pay for it, but I know that pricing threshold point for those last few units. So I can give those, I can make the case internally to the executives. A $500,000 commercial for a big time NFL game only sells out 10% of the time in that last unit. Yes. Yes. So the expected yield on that is 10%. It's $50,000. I could sell that for $55,000, and I could make the case internally we're making money. Yeah. Salespeople love that, right? So they can go to the client. Now I wouldn't say $50,000 for no, but you'd say we could choose X and make it super attractive to the brands. Yeah. And now that's where I just really got into the weeds right there. But I did all that work. I didn't put that on the sales team.
No,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. So you went out and you looked for those insights. You studied that. You applied the data.
It took me 3 years to come up with that idea.
Oh, gosh.
You know what I mean?
Amazing.
Like, I had to see this. I had to see the
you had to understand the trends, and you had to
Yeah.
understand how that works. So
Right.
it's interesting because you're the guy who's there to sit with the sales guys, understand what they're doing, but equally you're supposed to know the underlying data. You're supposed to understand the trends, but you're supposed to be looking for value where you can say, "Hey guys, I've just come up, with this idea. Can we test it? Can we hypothesize around it?
Yes.
Can we start to really uncover some insights here?" And it's interesting because does it take somebody like you to do that, or does it? And that's.
I think so.
Yeah,
I hope so. Right?
Yeah, no. I think that's the case.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because those specific insights that are hugely valuable to the executives could never be done without looking at that data and understanding those trends over time.
Yeah.
So the investment that you've made, even if it is over 3 years, could the payback for the company would be huge.
And for the record, like during those 3 years, you're still looking at that mass market average price and sell through and say, all right, you know what, we got to push these products onto our client base. Again, you don't want to force anything they don't want, but it's like, hey, like at least put it in the offering table. And then, you start getting granular when you're looking at, again, I'm working with finite inventory. In the digital world, you can just keep creating content. You don't run out of inventory. So in that instance, it might say, hey, just put out as much content as you can, because it doesn't matter if it's on your YouTube channel. You just keep putting on YouTube videos. Eventually, something will hit, and there's unlimited eyeballs. In game NFL, these live events that command so much attention. It's premium inventory.
It is,
and it's finite and it's perishable. So looking for those little insights just on simple yield analysis. We're chasing the NFL market's $4 billion in aggregate spend across all the networks. So these salespeople, they have to maintain these relationships and keep pushing deals. And if you work for Fox Sports, you have a cable network in FS1, you have NASCAR, you have the World Series, you have all these competing priorities. When's the salesperson going to look at the 70th unit in an NFL game? They're not going to do it. And hopefully our team has set up that strategy board early on, so that when the season's going, I often feel myself like almost disconnected. That's when I feel the most disconnected, because the wheels are in motion. Deals are coming in. The market's going to do what it does. So if you can find those insights right after the season as they're going on and prepare for the next business cycle, you're always forward looking. I think you need a team with an eyeballs on that data set.
And I think you're right. And the point for me is that it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a huge, big, data science focused team, because from where I'm sitting, you've made it quite clear that you've used a certain set of data to understand the principles behind spend throughout a period of a game. I don't know enough about the American sports to talk about it in detail, but the segments that you're selling in, and within those, and the products that you're selling, absolutely.
We did things like that in the World Cup too. We hosted the men's and women's World Cup.
Right, of course you did. Yes.
So there was a huge demand for the knockout rounds and the World Cup final championship match. And where our sales leader was saying, all right, to get into the championship match, you have to have a spend across all of our games in the group rounds, the early knockout stages. And I said, okay, but what if somebody just wants a championship game? What if we just charge this super high premium? We limited the amount of units that we could sell in just a championship match, because maybe they don't have the budget for a full tournament presence. So what you do is you create a little urgency too. It's like game theory. I'm big on game theory and testing these ideas. So it's like, all right, if we're going to air 40 commercials in the championship World Cup match, take 5 to 10 of them, charge a super high premium. If you just want that game, limit it to those amount of units, or you can buy a full tournament presence and get super high value in the championship game. Tomato, but bring that to the market, and now you're servicing two different customer bases, where if our sales leader said, I want them to have a full tournament presence, they might not want that.
Sure.
And so you're not bringing value to the client. You're forcing your hand. Now if you're in a high demand position, sometimes you can do that.
Yeah.
But I always show them there's more than one way to get home to your financial goals, and there's more than one way to provide value to the clients that you have, because not all of them want to buy the same way.
Sure.
So little instances like that.
Yeah. And it's understanding that process. It's understanding that purchasing habits.
Yeah.
But you have quite a unique insight into that industry. But equally, I don't know if that industry has things like a chief data officer, or it sounds like you would be classed as that individual, because you are working at a very strategic level, and then driving down to the teams to create those data products and so on, to understand how you can leverage them to sell this, sell the products.
The good part about the media business is there's so much data. There is a lot of data governance and security. It's a commodity business. We're competing with NBC, CBS, ESPN. When I was there at Fox Sports, so the data is super protective. It's publicly traded company.
Of course,
there's data companies and highly trained engineers and technologists. When I got there, we weren't using all the tools. I showed up at Fox and I said, "Do we have a data warehouse?" One of my supervisors or colleagues said, "What's a data warehouse?"
No way.
And I was like, "Yeah." So I was just like, "Okay." So I called. He's like, "You should call our guy in LA that runs our technology team." And I said, "Do we have one?" He's like, "Yep." I'm like, "We do?" And he's like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Are we using it?" And he's like, "Data's flowing in there, but nobody's."
Wow. No one's tapping into it. Wow.
Yeah. So it's become, that was 4 or 5 years ago. So that's become a major push now, and again in media you have all these external source research. So we're doing market research on what the competition's doing, brand presence on other, the NFL is commoditized. It's across 5 networks. So you can see a brand has a presence elsewhere, and we use that external data, map it to our internal, and see are we getting our fair share of spend from a brand that has a CBS. So we do things like that. They do have a chief data officer.
Okay.
The sports industry where I came from, Madison Square Garden, the Boston Bruins, sports leagues, your EPL teams over there, whatever. Historically, no, but there's been a massive push in the past 5 years.
I think, with Billy Bean and Moneyball and so on, I think we've seen a massive thrust.
It's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy that the on-field and on-court, the football, the basketball, the soccer operations teams actually influence the business folks.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It's usually the other round, where you get these smart business people to come in and look at everything from a metric-based lens. And sure enough, it was people evaluating, subjective talent on the field or on the pitch, and using insights to drive team performance that inspired the CEO would be like, geez, we should do this with our ticket sales. We should do this with our brand partnerships. So the industry's, we're behind, and again, during a pandemic, we're in a tough time.
Sure.
There's no sports going on, but we're 10 to 15 years behind.
Wow.
It's a sports industry where the data, probably where an organization like yours and clients you're working servicing are. In terms of, like Amazon, Facebook, Google, all these behemoths, we can't even see them right now. We got to go to them for some of their expertise.
Oh, of course.
Or lure them away. But so making use of ticket sales data and working with vendors and third-party data is super. It's getting better. It's flowing. Teams are doing it well, especially in the NBA is a kind of a world leader in that, in terms of the sports world. So it's happening. It's just, if you've been collecting data for 10, 15 years and not doing anything with it, you got to invest in cleaning that up first before you start getting into machine learning and algorithms.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So I'm gonna ask you a question around, you came in, you've absolutely seen that there's a wealth of data, but there's no real drive to use that data. How do you start to align your practices within the internal culture how do you start to build and get people to view that, hey, listen, this pot of data we've got here is a massive asset. We should be leveraging it.
Right.
How would you drive that? It's a question I get a lot.
I'd be interested in your feedback too, like, because I mean, you're working with, again, I've been in 2 industries really, or 3 kind of related, where you've probably in your consulting firm have seen it across industry. So I'd be interested in, in your take on it.
Sure.
But I always start with, like, this is so simple, but have you automated your reporting? And like do you have that mini, I'll even do like a daily sales kind of financial combination of a financial daily sales report. But it can be, let's say if you're in Tableau or something, it can be 20 tabs or 20 dashboards long. The first 5 are like your executive dashboards. Like, that's your daily newspaper. It's like checking the stock market when you come in every day, or reading the headlines in the newspaper. Can those be semi near real time? Can they be live? Can they be accessible? Can they be interactive? And can they be intuitive, so that an executive can sit down and not have to pick up the phone and say, hey, I want to know how much Ford Automotive is spending across their sports portfolio. Can I see that? How about I just make like that question? Sure, anyone can pull and pivot and send that in a body of an email, or put it in a spreadsheet real quick and send it off. Can that all those mundane requests, those repetitive requests that everyone kind of is asking themselves every day? Can those live somewhere real time? And it's so simple, because when I started, everywhere I've started, the phone could ring depending on the time of the year and the seasonality where you're at. It's like, hey, I just need a quick check on how this client's doing, or how that client's spending, or hey, what was our sales numbers yesterday?
Such a easy question to answer, but
exactly. So like, can that live somewhere? So that one, you're freeing me up to look at the 70th unit in an NFL.
Exactly.
That's what I
should do. The
doing.
really, really insightful work.
Now I'll stare at those. There's days where I would just stare at that 20-page newspaper. I'll just stare at those reports, and I'm thinking, like, what are we missing? Like, what are we not doing? But I think starting with reporting is so key, because one, it forces you to get the sales organization in line with finance. Like, we haven't talked about finance at all, right? Finance is always like, they help set the sales goals in the beginning of your fiscal year, setting a budget, setting an expectation of how much you're going to grow your business. And then the sales people got to go chase that. So aligning sales with finance, and then our team is like a mediator in between, of providing context to the sales teams in terms of, you're seeing the numbers look like that, but here's why the market is softer or stronger than we anticipated during budget season. So if you can have those reports aligned so that they're serving multiple parties, from the exec to the sales team to the finance team, and everyone's looking at what I like to just call like a single source of truth. Like, that's just the best way to get everyone on the same page, so that the questions, then you'll start seeing a second layer of questions that are more actionable. Like, hey, I want to approach this client and pitch something new to them. Can you help me structure that? How would that look? And again, that now we're talking about driving the business versus just already kind of intuitively knowing what's going on. We're all there. We're on the same page. So I usually start right there. And again, this isn't mind-blowing stuff.
It's not rocket science, is it?
No, but like, depending on where you are as a company, having that level of transparency. And you had a great post on LinkedIn a couple weeks ago about like data culture. And I said, like, what does that even mean? It's like culture is transparency, information sharing, single source of truth, holding each other accountable, and then having a data-driven subculture under that to help drive those decisions. If you're all on the same page as a company, and you're transparently sharing these kind of high-level reports of how the business is doing, and that 10-page, 20-page sales deck report answers a handful of those questions, you can move forward with driving the business forward versus looking behind you.
Of course.
I think that's like, I think that solves a lot, out the gate, getting going and having everybody be forward looking. I think that's kind of where I've always started, like nail that down, and you'll be good, you know?
Yeah. No, it's a good point, because I think that's the value that you need to show to those people who keep asking those questions day in, day out.
Yeah.
And if you can provide them with something that's tangible enough that answers their question, but actually what you said is what comes out of that. Is the next level of insight, because they start to understand what data they have, and then they start to get a little bit more curious about what data they could have.
Yeah. Now you're asking me real questions, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think that's the bit which, you know, when we work with a lot of companies, we always start with those, you know, tell us what those key business questions are. What are you asking yourself every day? Because, you know, Joe over there is taking, you know, 2 hours out of his time just to build one report. And, you know, we've got Joe doing 12 reports a day. You know, exactly. So, you know, why not automate? And then we can get Joe to uncover the real pile of stuff underneath that, which is so valuable, which is where that insight and we can, you know, drive the discussions around growth or efficiencies. But the other thing I tend to do, which, you know, which might take, sometimes people might take exception to, is the fact that a lot of companies I find don't have process mapped out. And there's a fundamental lack of understanding.
Taking notes.
Where you start to uncover process things which actually are so inefficient but aren't supported by data or tech or whatever it might be, and therefore someone's just doing something for the sake of it, and you start to uncover those things, and that's where the other bit of value sits. And so when I talk about culture, I talk about there's an endemic culture within the, you know, there's something that's established already within that company. Why am I going to disrupt it in terms of, hey, build a data culture? Half the people don't even know what a data culture is. In fact, I don't even know what a data culture is. You know, it's just a culture. So, but how can I aid that culture? How can I help it? How can I support it to be more efficient or to add growth drivers, to look at the strategic objectives and really pin down what drives that? You know, what are the process triggers behind that? You know, you talk about sales and marketing. God, there's, you know, sales and finance, but there's marketing, there's operations, and there's HR, and there's all those other, and you've just broken down 2 silos, which would have been between sales and finance.
Yeah, right.
And it's the rest of that, which I you know, we love to uncover, because that's the bit where you get the aha moments of, oh my God, I didn't realize that was happening. And if we do this, it will save you, you know, I don't know, $500,000 a year or £500,000 a year.
Yeah, so I mean, I mentioned reporting, but do you guys often start with that when you take on a new client, or do you kind of do your needs analysis and you uncover, like, God, there's just gaps in the process. If we button that up, then you'll get the data, or like how do you?
We do a bit of both. Because what we're doing is we're starting off, you know, from that strategic piece. Yeah. We want to understand at the same time how business process supports how business processes are supported across the business. So I'll give you an example.
Yeah, great.
Say something like a customer journey, right? You've got a customer journey that's been drafted, that looks end to end, from how a customer is external to a company to how they become a customer, how we nurture them, and how we retain them throughout that life cycle. So, you know, you've always going to have customers that are going to be, you know, companies that are going to be in acquisition mode, and they're looking for the customers, and they're fielding the, you know, the bits on ad spend or whatever it might be, and they're getting that customer into a pipeline, you know, into the usual funnel, and qualifying that leads, you know, going to the sales team, getting that sales qualified lead, nurturing it, doing the presentations, you know, selling the product, and then you've got the life cycle, you've got the management off the back of it. So, you know, I often ask, so if you have a process like that, if you have a journey map, have you mapped what data and what triggers you need across that? And 9 times out of 10, I get no.
Right.
So if you were able to do that, and then you sit down with the executives from, or not even just the executives, but say directors of functions, because you're mapping against that journey, you'll start to see how it bleeds into all the function heads, and then what questions they're asking, And then you build this huge, rich picture, and suddenly somebody says, wow, we should have been asking that question a long time ago, because actually we're not, that trigger doesn't help us to offer the client a new service, or we're not asking for the right level of data from that customer, or we're not giving the customer enough data to make a decision. So, you know, that's the bit which I believe is often left off. And I think that's where you get a process piece, because it's a journey map, effectively is that process. And you get the sort of data piece, but you know, in between that you get, well, what decisions am I making? What actions do I need to take in order to help that customer either buy or enter the process, or qualify us, or understand what our product does, and therefore it helps feed down that funnel. And they, you know, whoever's making the decision points or those triggers understands where that data is in which system, or we don't have that data.
I was just going to say, there could be gaps along that journey where there's not a system capturing that. So it's like, oh, here comes this customer. All of a sudden they disappear, and then they pop up on the other side because we don't have the technology, or we're not having the sales or marketing team input that data into a CRM or whatever it may be. You might start seeing stuff like that. And we break it down into first party data, which is, as you said, it could be data in a CRM system. It could be data in your finance system. It could be those objectives or targets or transactional things. Typical. Second party data could be your suppliers, could be your partners, could be your distributors, you know, because they've got data, and you might give them data, they may give you data back. And the third party is all that externalized data, you know, the Nielsen, the market kind of data, or the everything in the media world that
which you work with, or whether it's Experian data, because you're going down to a customer level, you might be understanding profiles, you know, on an aggregated basis of a pool of people around the country. So there's tons of things, but essentially what you do is you map out all of those, and you start to see, as you just said, where the gaps are, what you need, what systems you might need to build in, what gaps there are in the process, and therefore what you're doing is you're seeing rather, you know, a holistic view rather than this sort of siloed view that we typically tend to see. And that roadmap is built on that value that you're offering, because you've got all those business questions, you know exactly what drives it, and you can say to the execs, we've got these specific gaps. So that means what you thought were your priorities are actually not your priorities, because we don't have that data yet, but we can repackage it into this mode of delivery, and we can, and actually when you have those, when you do that, that's not a 12-month process. That could be, you know, a couple of weeks just doing that. But wow, it uncovers huge amounts of insight into and what's missing.
And that's funny, because again, working with the third-party data is something where, you know, for me, when I'm trying to make sense of everything to support our sales team, and we have all the interim data, but they have to go to their clients still. And again, if I'm talking, you know, watching a sports game live, and it's something where we're competing with other networks, it's like our consumer insights team, they're just bending the same data that NBC and CBS have, right? Because if I'm watching football on Fox, chances are I'm also watching on CBS, you know, like or like the big game on NBC at 8 p.m. in prime time on Sunday night. So our consumer insights team might make our sales team look the most prepared, and they might have the most insight. We've prepared ourselves really well using that external data, getting little nuggets about who our viewers are, their demographics, their purchase behavior, all that stuff. And then still at the end, the client goes, okay, so what are you offering me? And how much do I have to pay? And what's the structure of the deal? And so if a salesperson comes to me and is like, hey, consumer insights, where I've worked with consumer insights, and said, we found this about our customer journeys and those who view our product, and there's a lot of value in these assets. Well, then I have to go look, well, do we sell those assets? Are they already in high demand? If we're already selling them, then this is just icing on the cake. If it's like, oh, hey, we're hitting the same demographic that we didn't know about on our cable network, Fox Sports 1, that we hit in the NFL, and it's sold out not at a very, you know, high threshold. I was like, now we have something where where I can go and we can maybe push the envelope at scale with our team, bringing that to the market. But finding that along the journey and having access to that and to marry it with your internal data is like, you know, sometimes even me, like I want all the data, just give me it all at my fingertips and let me mine. But even then it's like, you still need the dedicated folks on the inside digging for that stuff on your consumer, because I'm looking at inventory and pricing and all. And
and it's a different way, but
But if they can provide me those nuggets or show me where they're publishing those nuggets, hopefully me and my teams are good enough at looking at that to then say, all right, cool, I can turn this into, along with the sales team and their eloquent pitches, I can turn this into something that that we communicate to our base of clients and really structure deals of value to who we're trying to you know, accommodate. So I like that customer journey, because you can find a lot of gaps in that process, depending on your technology setup and just how you're doing people and communication, right?
Correct. So, you know, on that, as you were talking, I was thinking about teams and how, you know, what's the most important thing for you when building data teams, when building a data organization? And when, you know, where do you start? What's the focus when you come and you know, give me the example of where you've been, you know, at Fox, and what were the first things that you did instinctively in terms of building or evaluating or understanding what teams you needed?
Right. I've seen this go two ways. It's like, one, the company invests in all these systems with data warehouse, data lake, a CRM system, you know, with comprehensive features and cool little, you know, a lot of fields to track, but then they don't have anybody sitting there driving it. So it just kind of sits there. Again, the Fox example where, you know, somebody said, we have a data warehouse, is anyone using it? So even if you're collecting that data and nobody's sitting there to drive that car, great. Like eventually it will be of value when somebody comes, but then it will take them a lot of time to catch up and learn everything you've been feeding into that system. So I always start with the people, and you know, more of your internal MBA consultant types is what worked for me. And even though, you know, MBAs might be a little overpriced this day and age, but like, you know, but you know, having that, just the ability to handle a massive set of data set and distill it down and tell a story with it. I think that's where I like to start setting up an organization. You have people that can do it. Maybe, like, you know, if you're a startup and you don't have a transactional system, you're just logging everything on spreadsheets, like organizing that spreadsheet will be your Bible and the best way to do it. So like, you should be really good at organizing that. And we're talking super manual, outdated Stone Age stuff, but you want to organize that stuff, and you want to have a person that can do it. So that, and the days that you invest into systems and technology, you can upload all that stuff and, you know, hand it off and, you know, make it. So I like to start with the people that can extract, visualize, critically think, and then go into the second layer of, all right, how do we have a system that can automate what we're doing? And then have, and again, I saw a lot of your commenters on your post when you were promoting the podcast, like people were talking about data governance, data security, and I was like, yes, we need, like, we need that, but like not my field, but like invest in the systems and then the people to control that. Then me and him talk about yet another silo or partnership. It's like that technology, that back end team, you really need to make them understand and translate on behalf of the sales team, maybe even the finance team. Now you start getting like almost like a wheel with spokes, right? Versus silos. You get this thing working together. So I like to start with people that can just tell stories. Maybe you can code, maybe you can do some cool scripting, but really just like, can you take a massive data set, summarize it into key KPIs that keep talking about to kind of find those overlaying trends and be like, all right, I've proven value in looking at the business this way. It's just super inefficient for me to spend the manual effort. So then invest in the technology and teams first. I like to go that way versus, hey, just buy the systems, we'll find the people to drive it later.
Sure.
Maybe the data's not going in clean. Maybe it's you're not tracking the right KPIs. Maybe you don't have all the right fields in there that you like. I like to start with the people that kind of know how to strategically look at a business, ask those right questions that we keep talking about. Asking the right questions.
Sure.
And then overlay all the technology on it. That's how it's worked.
That's cool.
Me.
Yeah.
I don't know if, again, like your clients or your investment banking, I know you were in a little bit.
So I think there's a couple of options. I love the fact that what you're doing is is asking people to work in a way that's they're being a translator. They're being the people who can sit from an understanding of what the business does, what's the business trying to achieve, to being able to translate a massive data set or even a small data set, but actually finding that and how does it marry up with what the business is trying to do. And I think maybe that's why the whole for you the MBA team structure starts, because they see right across from the business strategy. What are the drivers there? Where does the business want to get to in 3 to 5 years or even longer than that? But equally, what can I do to support that? And through this thing called data, but how do I then translate that into business speak, which I find, it's funny you have that point around data governance. A lot of data governance people, and then no slight on them. It's a big, massive area. We have to do a lot of data governance projects. Because 100%. At the end of the day, if your data quality is not good and the controls and the procedures aren't in place, but
garbage in, garbage out, right?
What I find is that the data strategy piece needs to be driven from what that business is attempting to achieve, and for me, that's the starting point. So I really love what you're saying in terms of. We want to get the translation effect first. We want to build that value, and then maybe, scale in a way that will bring in maybe, other teams who are going to be servicing that data, making sure it's of good quality, because the wider you go, and I'm assuming that, once these translators become more embedded in the business, and to me, they're like more business partners or someone who's going out and they're saying, hey, did you know that we could increase your sales by X by looking at this because we've tried that over here. And, we've already seen the data, and we can drive your sales, or we can look at new regions, or we can understand which clients are not, are going to churn, or whatever it might be. But that's what the sales teams and, they want to hear. They don't want to hear, the data quality that you have is terrible. I don't care.
They don't care, man. Sometimes, by the way, and I've worked with I worked with our engineers on building out our data warehouse and automating a lot of things. A lot of times, like, guys or girls, I just want all the data, man. Like, sometimes I don't even, I don't want to sit in that war room, and it's part of it. Like, sometimes you got to go through and audit everything.
You have to.
But sometimes I'd be like, look, I just want to be able to see this in some interface, visualization dashboard, extractable from my system. I just want it. I don't need you to manipulate it. I just need it fed in there so I can do it and then look at it in various ways. So.
And I think that's the bit which often becomes they just want all the data. But I think what a lot of people will do with that
to start.
To start. Yeah, absolutely. I've seen the flip side where somebody says, just give me all that data. And what do they do with it? They download it onto an Excel spreadsheet, and they combine it with another Excel spreadsheet, and you've lost the actual efficacy of that data. Whereas I can see what you're doing is saying, give it to me, because I've got all these hypotheses going on, and I need to make sure that I can drive
hypotheses from the CEO or whoever. Correct. They're tasking me with looking at it, right?
That's it.
Either way.
Yep. And that's the bit which I think I like, because what you're doing is connecting with what the CEO's values and drivers are, and then underpinning that with the data that drives the decision making, or what levers that they've got to pull. And therefore, that is absolutely from a sales perspective. What is it being, what is being done to drive that? And of course it's from marketing, and of course it's from operations, and of course it's from HR and all the other departments that the CEO needs to make sure is driving that business forward. But we, you know, and I think that's, you know, to bring in translators, because I think translators has always been something that's thought about too late.
I agree.
And
I agree.
You know, that translation effect becomes, you know, I often talk about the level of insights that a business needs, but in the sense that, you know, what people do is they'll just create a dashboard for the sake of it because somebody said they wanted a pie chart or whatever, and that sits around the business. Nobody uses it, and suddenly you've got 12 or 13 of those things. And I always call it the dashboard graveyard because, you know, they just go into the graveyard, rest in peace, never used again. But really, those translators weren't there to actually work out what the business needed, why they wanted to make why they wanted that bit of data. What's the reason you need it? And that's where I find a lot of people ask me, so, you know, we built that for so-and-so and they don't use that. I said, well, did you ask them what they need to do, why they need to use that data? Oh, whatever we just designed the dashboard for. So I think that translation effect is
it's a lot of, and you've got to put in the work to get people to adopt that stuff. So like when I'm working with the engineers, I'm like, hey, here's a report that I do. It's manual. It's a combination of extracts and downloads and pivots and maybe a spreadsheet. I want to automate it. I want to make it live. Sometimes they just send me back like a canned report and I can't I'm like, guys, no, like I just need to make sure that everything I use to create here is extractable in, call it, again, Tableau is kind of your visualization tool. So something like that, or ClickSense, whatever. Give me that sitting on top of everything you've cleansed. I'm going to build the report because you haven't ever had a conversation with their sales team. You don't know what they're looking at. Let me tell that story. And then it's so funny. You said the graveyard of dashboards, because when again, at Fox, we had the data warehouse that was discovered and then started to be utilized. And we went all in as a company on it. And then everyone starts like, oh, cool, I can publish dashboards. And then you see this huge library stuff. So the thing I took pride in is like, all right, I did my 10 to 20 page top line report with further insights in the latter half of the report. Then I went right to the sales leaders and I sat with them every day for 3 weeks of stop calling me when you have this question, because they would call me. I was like, I just walked you through this yesterday. So I'd walk them through, get them really efficient in whatever platform you have and wherever you can go and get them. And then slowly you'd see our graveyard of oh, this one's got 10 views, 15 views. And mine had 2,000 views over by a lot of different constituents, from the people running the sales organization to my bosses to my direct reports, looking at inventory reports because they're fulfilling orders and looking at pricing. Now they're using that to drive their decisions of who they got to go chase to fill in the last few commercials we have to sell for a Major League Baseball playoff game. They're using these reports real time, refreshing them. Just putting that into the canned report and here it is, just it doesn't work that way. You got to build it. It's got to be flexible. Your reporting needs could change week to week. Hey, now that you're getting those next level of questions that are more insightful, you can then change the report to incorporate that piece of information. And everyone continuously gets smarter. And then you have to continuously sit with them and train them and say, keep going to this source. If we're all looking at this source, even if it's flawed, we're all looking at it the same way. And if finance finds a problem with the numbers, they're not quite following our fiscal rules or how we recognize the revenue, we'll tackle that later. But if we're all looking at it the same way, then we're all encountering the same problems, and we're very consistent in how we approach our business problems.
So, I think we're getting close to the end of it.
Cool.
But, we've talked a lot from, how you build confidence into sales teams by using data. And we've touched on culture, and we've touched on, very loosely touched on the design or understanding, but the translator effect, which is important. What are the things that you from your experience, whether that be at Fox or other places, but in the sports and media, where do you think they should go next? What are the things that they should start to think about in terms of data and analytics and the optimization of how they use that across their business? What are those nuggets that you could, impart?
I think, especially in the media space, and it's not sports specific, it's just like media in general, like the content space is becoming so fragmented. Right. So every desire and wish you have to consume content that entertains or educates you today, there's a niche for it, man. Like, look, you got this podcast. There's 30 million podcast episodes out there, right? So there's ones on stand-up comedy and hip hop and rap music and business and the financial markets. You have live sports across 5-10 different networks. You have all these streaming services. So the fragmentation of customers to get their attention. I think across sports, media, whatever it is, even just your business, your small, like getting the attention of somebody and then holding it and keeping it is like, that's where it is. And it's, again, we kind of talked loosely about some topics we covered today, like the dynamic between the cost of customer acquisition and the cost of growing your current customers. I think that really needs to be prioritized right now because it's so easy to, even if you go viral or your business is really hot for a minute, all it takes is just another little segment or another fragment of a market that catches somebody else's attention and boom, like they divert and you can lose them. So I think upselling, I think offering more products, more free value, again, like your consulting firm, like now you'll have this as an educational podcast of things that you do. Like you don't have to monetize your podcast. It's just like a marketing thing, right? So it's like, I think providing value to people, added value to what you're already doing is kind of giving it that brand stickiness, right? It's like, I come and I stay and I'm committed to you. And now you can use them as your test market for new ideas and products. And not that you're ignoring new customer acquisition, but it's more expensive and it's harder to do. So it's like once you get them in the door, and then what I've been finding, and I can, maybe afterwards, if you're going to do comments and questions when we release this, I can cite some of the things that I've looked at market research, but it's like those super users or those power users or those super loyal customers, they become your marketing arm. Like, oh, I heard this podcast. Hey, Samir, you should check it out. I know you'd be interested in it. And you trust me just as Matt, like referring you to that versus you trying to like blast this out into the atmosphere of 30 million podcast episodes. It's like you rely on that small network of people that trust you, and those super users that are really loyal to you. I think you get more out of your investment dollar. This is a hypothesis, and I think it's playing out for sure. Versus wasting your marketing ROI dollars at like going out and trying to just grow your base so rapidly. It might depend on where you are. No. If you're just getting a startup business, you got to acquire new customers. But I think that's
and I think it's that trade-off. It's always that trade-off between. I've seen that effect in many companies. From sales and marketing and the sort of acquisition process, and how do we keep those customers? And I think how do we refer to them? How do we understand what their needs are and build and their behaviors and profiles? And 9 times out of 10, many times there isn't enough understanding around that base, and they will leave. They go because you're not speaking to them. The messaging is not right.
You can't take them for granted, right?
Your brand is not gelling with them as it used to once. Or products have changed that really don't. So from my perspective, the data angle is able to uncover a lot of that, where the signals are that they're telling you what's happening with this product and why isn't it selling in this demographics anymore, because they don't need it any longer. So how do we then tap into that and understand who they are and what they want? And many times we've worked with marketing organizations where, to your point with the spray and pray, which is let's just blanket cover all of the people in a marketing effect. But actually, if you narrow it down, if you segment, if you really understand what they want, you will make more in terms of what you want to get out of whatever that objective is for you, that goal.
Right.
Then you will going to a wider pool. And I think slowly, I think you're right. Slowly we're seeing that, but it's still, that message is still taking time. I mean, we've got, top marketers, people like Gary Vee and so on, talk about all the time, know who you're pitching to, know the data around those people, uncover what their needs are and their behaviors and profiles. One company we're working with, one of the board members has just said, well, why, how is it that we're still selling this product when it's lost its value? We think it's lost its value. Why are people still buying it? So it's a question that they know that people are still buying it. It's great, but actually they're asking the question, this is an old product, why is it still being purchased? So they're trying to uncover something which they really don't, understand and that's the bit which I think data and psychology and that's another whole podcast.
Well, the game theory stuff of putting two options in the window and letting people, but you got to structure that somewhat scientifically, even though it might be a little bit of an art of, all right, I'm giving you three options as a consumer to come into my ecosystem. This one's more expensive and a little more high value. This one's a little cheaper and just gets you access, like whatever it may be. Putting those in and making them choose is definitely a little more. You're restricting yourself because you're giving them those options. But if you overwhelm them with choice, they might not even choose to play the game. So.
And I think that's what data can really do. That can drive that understanding of where you need to chop and change with that customer base, and maybe build a new product or build a new service that is going to help them do X or Y. So I think that's and those are great points, by the way, really great points around honing in and uncovering that pure segment of that you need to.
And that's where that third-party data and like the macro market, working with your biz dev and corp devs and your investment banker types internally on acquiring new assets or whatever. Yet another silo that for another day, but that's another group that we would work with. Like, what's working internally? How does that marry with what's going on in the changing environment? And then can we take that process and scale inside, or can we already use what we have and compete with what's going on? I agree.
Great. Matt Synakowski, it's been absolutely wonderful speaking to you. It's been a pleasure. Man.
Rookie debut on the Data Strategy podcast.
I could speak all night, but for another time. But no, thank you so much. Really great insights.
It was great having me. Thanks.
Thank you. Take care.
All right. Talk soon.
Bye-bye.